Welcome to Disney A History, a podcast where we discuss the history of different Disney characters and their impact on pop culture throughout the ages. My name is Lauren, and along with my co host Abby, we thank you for joining us on this magical adventure. On this episode of Disney A History, we will be discussing Snow White's origins, what Walt Disney Animation Studios did with the story, and the impact she has had on pop culture. The first thing we wanted to discuss in talking about the Grimm fairy tale versions is the purpose of the fairy tale and why they were written. So, fairy tales and fables were written to give a moral lesson and to entertain. And adults would often share these stories with other adults while working, kind of like podcasts. They would look at their friend and be like, "Hey, I'm bored. Can you tell me a story that you have in your, mind, your wheelhouse?" And they would share the stories with each other. And then later on that night, they would go home and share with their families. So I thought that was something fun, um, that's how fairy tales came about, was just sharing it with your coworkers while you're mining for diamonds for the evil queen.
It was also a good way to keep it from changing too much, because if you ever played a game where you have to keep on repeating a message till it gets to the last player, it always changes. So this kept it to be like one story where everyone heard the same thing, which is really nice, so that our story of Snow White is pretty similar to their version of Snow White back then in 1812.
Similar enough to know that it's the same story and that it's based on the same thing, yeah, for sure. But different enough to make it safe and not rated R, because if we were to do a completely gory version of this, like a traditional, like, and show every bit of it, it's not something I would want to watch on film.
It's fun to read about for sure, but yeah, I wouldn't want to watch it either. Especially where like it was just so gory. Like I really see why they made them edit it down to be a little more family friendly.
Yeah, because the Grimm brothers actually published 7 different variations of their fairy tales. They had different collections of the same stories because they would submit it to the editor, and they'd send it, like, they would publish it and then be like, but actually, like, can we make this not as gross, because we don't want children to be afraid of their own parents.
Yeah, so I think the best way to go into this is to tell you a little bit about the original version. And the really cool thing about that, like Lauren just mentioned, is that the Evil Queen was originally supposed to be Snow White's mother, which sounds okay until you start reading it to your kids and they start getting scared of their mother when they're going to bed. Like, ooh, is she gonna get jealous of me? Is she gonna try to like murder me one day? Which was not good, so they had to change it to Step Queen. And then on top of that, to make it
Stepmother.
Stepmother Queen. But on top of that, not only was she just scary, but she actually ate the organs that was supposed to be Snow White in the original story.
That is straight up disturbing.
Yeah. I don't think I could handle that version if Disney decide to draw that in there.
Another part of the story that's different from the animated version is the fact that the queen disguised herself 3 separate times to be able to trick Snow White into dying, because each time she would go knock on her door disguised, try to give her something, and then she'd go back home to her mirror and ask the mirror who's the fairest in the land or whatever. And the mirror would say, "Ah, nah, sis, it's still Snow White, and she's 1,000 times fairer than you." And so she would get mad again and go dress up as something else and go back. She did this 3 times. And Snow White was like, "Oh, yeah, come on in. It's okay. Kids, don't talk to strangers in the middle of the woods when you know that your stepmother hates you," or real mother in some one variation. So yeah, the purpose of this story was to tell kids, don't talk to strangers. But there are a lot of fairy tales that tell us not to talk to strangers. This one just happens to be a little bit more, I don't know, juicy than others.
But like at least in the other fairy tales, usually the person trying to kill you isn't your blood relative. So
Girl.
you don't have to worry as much.
Yeah, for sure. That is wild. Like, yeah, definitely would not want to read my child a story of the actual mother. So, but yeah, of 7 different variations, only one of them is her actual mother. So it's really not that bad, is it? Just giving stepmothers a bad rap.
It's bad in the fact that they wanted that to be the only version, and it's the editors that really saved us.
Yeah, but like, what's the motivation in doing 7?
I guess they just wanted the profit off of it.
Indeed, they did. They did profit quite a bit off of their stories.
Their editors probably weren't as good as they were today, because if they had to do a re-edition of this, they probably would have caught it the first time and not 6 versions later.
I didn't read every single variation of it. I just read the first and the last. And other than the stepmother and a couple of like symbols throughout, and the way the prince took the princess, there wasn't that much variation in the stories. So I'm not 100% sure of what the other 5 in the middle of the ones that I read say, but they can't have been that different. They literally just added the story to make more money off of the fairy tale books. Which another thing that the Grimm brothers were actually scholars. They both went to school to better themselves, and they needed a creative outlet. And this lawyer had come up to them and asked them to help him collect different stories and fables, fairy tales and fables, to like uh, gather the oral tradition so that they can have it written down. They're like, "Oh yeah, that sounds like a fun project." And so they gathered these and for the guy, but like a year later, the guy like completely abandoned the project. And the Grimm brothers, Jacob and Wilhelm, were like, "You know what? We have all these stories and like I'm into it. What do you want to publish a book with me, bro?" "Yeah, sure, bro. Let's go."
I mean, just imagine you're trying to be a lawyer, and then all of a sudden you're like, "Oh wait, I actually want to go into writing stories down instead." Like such a leap, but so accurate to something I would do.
Oh my gosh, I play The Sims. I know you do too, but in Discover University, the literary degree actually helps you become a lawyer. So this is actually quite interesting that it's related.
I mean, you do have to be quite articulate to be a lawyer, so it makes sense. But yeah, I know a lot about how the Grimm brothers got into collecting the stories and writing them down. But I definitely need to look into Hans Christian Andersen. But I didn't actually look into him because it was a last minute discovery that he has a Snow White version too. And his is pretty different. It's still like the same generic setup that there's an evil queen, Snow White, stuff goes down.
Jealousy.
Yeah. And same moral message, it's just the nuances are totally different. And one thing that I found really interesting was that the step queen, she is actually supposed to be an old nurse in this one, and Snow White picks her to be her new stepmother because the king allows her to pick who she wants as a mother. And then,
Because her mother died in childbirth.
yeah, and then she realizes the mistake she made. But it all ends with the queen picking her own death by accident, and she gets thrown into a spiked barrel and rolls to her death. So that was super interesting. And she didn't have to eat Snow White's organs.
Yes, in the Grimm brothers version, they actually put hot iron shoes on the queen and make her dance to her death. But in the Hans Christian Andersen version, they put her in a spike barrel. I was just like, ah, no, that's so gross.
Which one do you think is worse, though? Like, which one would you not want to happen?
I feel like the barrel might be quicker versus the hot
Yeah,
shoes.
my thing is like the barrel is at least going to be probably a quicker death, but the hot shoes sound a little more pleasant because at least it's just your feet
No,
burning at
you
that
can't
point.
use the word pleasant. That's not allowed.
A little more pleasant.
No, not pleasant.
A
A little
little.
more tolerable, maybe. Even that's a
It's
stretch.
painful, but your nerves are going to die kind of fast. Like they only last so long when you're wearing these hot cold shoes. But then like you still have to like keep dancing until you pass out.
I'd rather go quicker. So, comparing the Grimm brothers to the Disney version, the way the prince gets the princess. So, In Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, the animated feature-length film, she actually meets the prince before. But in the Grimm brothers version, they do not meet before. And I think that makes this more creepy because he just is walking through the woods. So Snow White has been put into a glass coffin with gold trim with her name put on it by the seven dwarves. They're grieving. The prince strolls by, sees this beautiful 7-year-old girl in the original. In the later versions, she doesn't have an age at all. But in the original one, she was 7. He sees this 7-year-old girl laying in a coffin. She's beautiful, a beautiful young lady. And he's like, I need her in my collection, I guess. He wanted to keep her with him forever. So he told the dwarves, like, I'll pay you any amount of money that you want if you'll let me keep her. They're like, no, 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 no. She's ours. We love her. And he was like, please, please, I will honor and respect her. Please just give her to me. And finally they had mercy on him and they're like, I mean, I guess so. If you love her as much as we do, I guess we can share. So they give her to the prince, and the prince has his men pick her up. And as they're carrying the coffin to the prince's castle, they one of the guys trips on a stone, drops the corner of the coffin, and kind of burps Snow White, and the apple piece that she had eaten lodged out of her dislodged from her throat, and she woke up. And the prince told her what happened, and she fell in love with him, and they lived presumably happily ever after until, they got married and invited the stepmother to the wedding and killed her.
Not sure how happy it can be though, because I mean, he's definitely a little creepy. Because, I mean, think about the age difference. They never give an age, but she's 7, and there isn't any 7-year-old little man running around the forest just happens upon this queen, well, princess, future queen, and is like, wow, she's really pretty, I want her. No, if he was a 7-year-old, he would be like, ew, girl, death, gross, whatever. So this was a grown man taking the 7-year-old because he wants to stare at her all the time, even though she's dead. Like, it's not a fun time there. But it did say that she consented to go in, so I guess it's happy.
Yeah, she said it said she loved him, so that sounds like consent to me.
It's just wild that a 7-year-old can consent to getting married. I mean, it's different times back then, but I mean, it's still 7 was a little bit on the young side.
Yeah, 1812, I mean, if you think about it, wasn't I mean, it was 200 years ago. I guess that was a long time. I was gonna say it's not that long ago, but I mean, I guess it kind of is.
I mean, look how much the world changes in like 100 years, so
Yeah.
a lot has changed.
So as far as consent, Snow White in Hans Christian Andersen version was only 15. She was only 15. So still a little sketchy, but a little bit better than being 7. And I guess the brothers would have gotten backlash for her being so young, so maybe that wasn't even okay then. But they were just going off of what the stories that people told them orally had said. They just had to edit them a little bit later down the road. But I do appreciate everything they did as far as recording these stories because I really enjoy the oral tradition. It's an art form uh, that they would retell these stories over and over again. I know there's a bunch of stories from African cultures that have been passed down that have not been recorded, and I would love to be able to read some of those one day. If someone out there wants to go and record all of those stories, I would support you wholeheartedly. And I think that concludes our history section. Let's jump into the Disney version.
So I think a good way to transition into talking about the Disney version is to start with the art style. And the really cool thing about Disney's production is that they had to invent a new camera in order to get the style that they wanted. And it's called a multiplane camera. And I could go into detail about it, but just to keep it simple, it basically just means that they have a glass plane, a transparent plane, and they can take both of them and just move them around or switch them out as they need to make it look flowy and not have to do a background a million times when they can just make a really long one and pull it to have that nice flow and they don't have to worry about matching things up too much.
Ooh, that's really, really cool.
Yeah. I I think it's really cool that they invented it, and not only did like it work out really well, but it worked so well that a few other companies started to like try to make their own, and that they use this camera for multiple other movies down the line. I think it's most noticeable in Bambi on the opening scene, and if you watch that, like I think that's a really good feeling of like how the camera works.
Did they use it on Sleeping Beauty as well for the dancing scene?
I'm not exactly sure like what scenes they did it for because I wasn't paying attention to the background. The best way to see it is like looking at the background to see how it flows because you can kind of see that they're pulling it, not just drawing in the animation. So I'm not sure, but they probably used it for that. They just had the whole room as one piece and they moved the board with the dance.
Yeah, one of my favorite pieces of animation is the Aurora dancing through the woods. It's so cute. But we'll talk about that in episode 3.
But speaking of movement, a really cool fun fact about it is that the dwarfs march home. If you watch that part where they're singing like the hi ho and stuff,
Yeah.
you can see all the different dwarfs. They kind of keep in pace with each other, but they walk a little different. Like Grumpy has a more attitude in his walk, where Sleepy is a little like looser in his bone structure, and Dopey is just completely offbeat the whole time. But because of all the different nuances in each character, they actually took 6 months to animate that 1 minute segment.
Oh, wow. 6 months for a 1-minute segment? Are you kidding me?
Yeah, imagine like you spent all this time and you finally watch it and it's like, it's over already?
Right? I thought it would have been at least 10 minutes.
Another thing that I noticed was that there was a lot of gags in it, like a lot of like funny bits visually and audibly. But one of the things that I noticed was when they were like peeking over the bed to see what the monster was, and like they kind of realize it's Snow White. It's just the top of their face, and then once they get like a little more comfortable, the noses pop up and it goes boop 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 boop. And that is actually a gag that Disney paid $5 for like the artist to do because they wanted it to be as funny as possible so people would come see this first long animation, the full feature length. And in order to like get people there, he figured, oh, comedy sells well. Let's make this as funny as possible. I'll pay any animator to come up with a funny gag to put in there, and you'll get $5. Just if like if it makes it, you get an extra on top of what you're already making.
Yes, and that $5 today with inflation is worth $93.03 in 2021. And that's just crazy. He was paying almost $100 for a gag, for gags. And one of my favorite ones that they ended up using was actually the scene where they're dancing with Snow White and they stack themselves and like put the coat on.
Oh, I love that scene.
I That's so cute. I love that one. It's precious. And Dopey be like, "Hey girl, how you doing?" But like no words because he don't talk because he's never tried.
But imagine getting paid $100 for every time you make a joke at work. Like that's living the life. But I think that wraps up about the art animation. The other only like interesting thing about it that I'll mention is that they had over 2 million sketches and over 750 artists working on the project.
Yes, that is such a massive project, especially since the company was about to go under. They had already made all of the Mickey Mouse short films, or they had started making them. Obviously, they didn't make all of them before Snow White, but they were making them, and the studio was losing money. And Walt and his family put in all of their life savings into Snow White, hoping that it would be successful. And this was the first feature length film that had ever been created, animated, and aren't we all glad that it was such a success because without it we wouldn't have met, we wouldn't have done our college program at a Disney park, and we wouldn't have had all of these beautiful beautiful animated films that we know and love.
The funny thing is that his wife actually thought that the movie was going to bomb, and like she was really scared because all their money's tied up into this, and she didn't think the public would like it. And now here we are. A lot of time has passed and people are still loving the movie.
Yeah, and they gave their kids all of the financial security they could ever dream of. So we can talk a little bit about the animators. There was this group called Disney's Nine Old Men, and the Nine Old Men was actually a play on Supreme Court justices. But there was Disney's Nine Old Men. They were staples in his animation studio, Walt Disney Animation Studio, and they had worked together because back then they were the Nine Young Men. But of course, everyone gets older, so over the ages they got older, and they have this nickname, and it's this elite group of animators, and everyone knows about them. There's this beautiful documentary on Disney Plus about Frank and Ollie and their animating journeys.
I saw that one. That one was really cute.
And one of the animators actually worked on Jiminy Cricket. And because there's a line in Snow White, and they say, "Oh, Jiminy Cricket," but it's like a kind of a catchphrase, kind of like a, "Oh, darn, Jiminy Cricket." And but Jiminy Cricket became a character later on in Pinocchio. And I think that's so much fun that they were able to incorporate that. And it kind of like creates this loop and kind of connects the films a little bit.
Something I saw about that animator was that he actually almost quit after working on Snow White because they weren't going to use two of the scenes that he spent all his time on. And he got really upset because, I mean, it takes a ton of time to just make 1 minute. So he put a ton of work into this. And just to have them say, it's not as funny as the other scenes. I get why he tried to leave, but Walt Disney convinced him to stay because he was such an amazing artist, and because of this belief that Walt had in him, he stayed and made a character that everyone recognizes now.
Yes, of course. And we've kind of talked about the difference in actual storylines. If you're here, you've probably seen the original Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs animated feature film. And you've heard us talk about the Grimm brothers and Hans Christian Andersen's version of Snow White. So you kind of have heard the differences and how it's a little bit more kind. Snow White is a kind character. Um, in the original one, we didn't mention it earlier, but the dwarves were super clean in the fairy tale versions. And in the animated film, Snow White comes in and does the cleaning, and she has the help of all of her animal friends. So I think that's a really interesting comparison. And on that note, I think we can move right into talking about the pop culture and the impact that she has had. So, when we discuss the impact that Snow White has had on pop culture, I think the biggest thing that Snow White has done for pop culture and our culture in general is has been how many adaptations of her story that there have been. So the Grimm brothers had 7 adaptations, but there have been over 55 different variations in visual media of Snow White's story. And that is just mind-blowing because I saw on the list of different Snow White adaptations and some of them were in foreign language and some of them were missing. So I was like, okay, I know that this one exists, but it's not on the list. So it was an incomplete list, but over 55 pieces of visual media for Snow White.
I looked at that list too, and I think the thing that stood out to me the most on that list was that Betty Boop had a version of Snow White, and I do regret watching that one. I wouldn't recommend it, but the really cool thing about that one is that the person who was on that team for Betty Boop, he was actually working with Disney at one point to come up with a concept art for Snow White and what her look should be. And I think it'd be really interesting to see what that version would be with a Betty Boop version Snow White. But looking at the art, I'm really glad that they went with a different direction on that one.
Yeah, no offense to the Betty Boop group, but I don't like the style of Betty Boop's animation and her look, her stick eyelashes, and her vampiness. Keep family friendly, but I don't like Betty Boop.
But like the good thing about that is that they didn't go with that because Disney wanted her to look younger, because where the version that was originally done, she was supposed to be 7, and then Hans had her at 15, and he wanted to go with that teenager vibe but didn't want to make her like overly sexualized or anything. He still wanted her to have that young accent to her. He wanted her to have like the rounded shape that fit that time period.
Yes, because she was modeled after the beauty standards of 1937, and Betty Boop was just a little too old. But on the list of things, I saw one that stood out to me. It was called The Charmings, and it was a series. It had 2 seasons in the early 1980s, and I was able to watch one of the episodes on YouTube, and it's the most beautiful piece of visual media I've ever seen in my life. It was completely hideous and beautiful at the same time. Like, you know the actor that plays Brock in Reba?
Yeah, I love him.
He plays Prince Charming in The Charmings.
No way, I'm gonna have to look this up. I need to see him in it. I need to see the photos.
Because at first, like, because the quality of it was so grainy, I couldn't tell it was him. Like, he had his, like, gorgeous hair. But when he spoke, I was like, Brock? Stop it. Oh my gosh. It's like, this is iconic. Like, what? So that was the version that stood out to me the most on that list. And, like, how many different actresses have played Snow White is quite remarkable. But my favorite, we can talk about our favorites, is Once Upon a Time. I absolutely love what they did with Snow White's character in Once Upon a Time, up until a certain point. Like, we don't talk about 3B forward.
Yeah, I love her version of that. I love that Snow White in that version is like really true to the core of like being a strong, powerful woman while still being like dainty at times. Just like playing that part up, and the fact that she ended up saving the prince's life like multiple times. I thought that was a really cool adaptation of it.
Yes, absolutely. Because I would classify myself as a feminist, but I believe in celebrating every form of femininity. And I believe that that captures all forms of femininity.
I agree. We need to have that balance in there.
Absolutely.
But for my favorite, I actually really like the Sydney White in the Seven Dwarfs. I really like the direction that they took with having Sydney White, played by Amanda Bynes, like falling in love with her guy slowly rather than just like suddenly near the end. And I also liked that they gave the prince more character and made him very charitable. There's just like a lot of nods to both the original and Disney's version in that film.
Yes, and did you know that the reason the prince wasn't featured in the animated film as much was because it was so difficult to get his movements correct? Because they wanted the two, humans, Prince and Snow White, to be as realistic as possible. Whereas with the dwarves, they were able to uh, make it more of a caricature and make it a little more like floppy and make their bodies do different things. But the prince was super hard for them to get right, so that's why he's only in there 2 times.
Yeah, I didn't know that. That's really cool though. And it makes a lot of sense because it's really hard to get the human body down in general. And they were working with just like mirrors in front of them, where it's kind of cool that now you can put up a video of someone walking, put in slow motion, and really break it down. So, and doing caricatures does sound a lot easier, especially when they have to do so many frames. Did you have a least favorite version? I mentioned that I didn't like the Betty Boop version that I saw.
Um, I mean, just because Snow White's not my favorite princess, like I don't watch all of the adaptations of her, so I don't have a least favorite. But I mean, I didn't watch the Betty Boop, but I would say that Betty Boop would be the least favorite because I just don't like her in general. Do you think that Snow White in the original version? So we'll talk about it in two different sections: the original and the animated. Do you think that she's a good role model?
For the original, definitely not. But I mean, their goal wasn't to create a role model, it's just for the lesson. So I see why they didn't have that part in there. But I mean, the fact that she didn't learn her lesson and almost got herself killed 4 times really says a lot about how you should not be following her direction of opening up the door for strangers multiple times.
I concur. Yeah. Her purpose in the original was different than what her purpose was in the animated feature film. So yeah, I would have to agree that she was not the best role model in that one. But I will say that people harp on Snow White in her film, but I think it's unwarranted because if you think about it, you have to be a really kind and gentle person to be able to get animals to follow one follow you, two to help you find a house. They led her to the dwarves' house and they helped her clean the house. Like I can't get my animals to help me. So that is just a testament to her character and like her goodness. Like, yes, she was beautiful. That's why everyone had mercy on her all the time, is because she was beautiful. But on the inside, she was kind too. And I think that is something that little girls and boys can look up to and say, yeah, she's she's just a nice, kind-hearted person.
I agree. Another way you can see that she's good on the inside and out is that she sees this old woman who we know is the queen and she doesn't expect anything of her. She just sees this old lady selling her goods and she's like, "Oh, like you must be tired. Like what are you selling? Like I'd love to consider it." And then when she gets injured, she's like, "Oh, just come on into my cottage." And even though the animals are like throwing themselves at this old woman, she's like, "Oh, no, no, shoo off. Like, what has this old lady done to you? Like, treat her with kindness." Some people would instantly judge based on the hag queen's looks, and Snow White just instantly treated her with kindness.
Yeah, that is just a complete 180 from when you watch what the prince did in Beauty and the Beast. Not he was not nice to anyone.
Yeah, the Beast is definitely not a role model, but we'll get into that in a different podcast.
Yeah. I think in conclusion, we can just say don't talk to strangers, but be nice to people that might need help.
Yeah, I think that's a really good message.
Yeah. And this is I can get behind. And then as a group, people talk about Snow White and like they're a little more lenient on her character because she's the first one. So her being the first official Disney princess has given her a grace, so to speak, for the public, the general public, because at least Disney fans, I shouldn't say general public, in Disney fan culture, because she's the first, she set the stage, she set the tone for how Disney does literally everything else, every other feature film that they've ever done, because this was the first one. It was the first feature film, and it was the very, very first princess. So, thank you so much to all of the animators that worked on this film, even though you're definitely not listening to this podcast. We send our thanks and our gratitude as Disney fans. So, one of the things that I enjoy about Disney films in general is the music. I always have a Disney song stuck in my head. Today, it was definitely Whistle While You Work because I was editing other things and was working on getting this podcast ready for everyone. And that was something that was in my head.
I really like the soundtrack for this movie too. Not because like I like grew up listening to this soundtrack. I actually just watched Snow White recently, but I found the songs to be like really catchy and I've been singing them all day. So, I would say that the music is a good like probably an 8 out of 10 for me. I would listen to it again for sure, but definitely not my favorite overall Disney soundtrack.
Yeah, I would agree. It's definitely not my favorite. She's not my favorite princess. It's not my favorite movie, and it's not my favorite soundtrack. But that doesn't negate the fact that I still love and enjoy the story and everything that they did to create it. So, what is your favorite song when you watch it?
I don't know, it's hard to pick a specific one. But my favorite part in a song is definitely when she is singing into the well and you hear the echo back. I thought that was super creative and definitely like stands out in your mind.
Yeah, especially for the time whenever they were just learning how to do things and make the film, that was iconic for sure. One of my favorites is Someday My Prince Will Come, just because I like the vocals. I'm a soprano, so I like to go high with my voice, and that allows me to do that. Everything she sings is fun for me to sing along with, but that one is, I like the tune and the melody and the notes, which are all the same thing, but I like it. I love it. Want some more of it?
I also like how she's singing about like someday my prince will come. but she's not actively looking for her prince either, really, throughout the movie, because all these things are happening to her and she's still not hyper focused on finding the guy. She's more focused on just finding somewhere comfortable to live and being helpful. Like, I think she had her head on pretty straight for a young girl. I mean, definitely not like the best thinking throughout the film, but when you take her age in, like, I think that the music really set the tone for who she was, and you can't falter on her age.
For sure. And to our listeners, you can head over to our Reddit, Disney A History Pod, and tell us what you love about Snow White. We want to keep this a happy and inviting community. I've said she's not my favorite, but I'm not like, I don't hate her. I love all of the characters that Disney's created. Um, and I want us to talk about all the things we love about Snow White and to start building a community. And you can do that over on our Reddit. And we look forward to hearing uh, all of your thoughts and comments. And you can give us feedback on how this podcast went today. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you next time. Thank you for listening to Disney A History. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite platform so you never miss an episode. For further discussions, join us on our Reddit. For bonus content, you can find us on TikTok and YouTube. See you real soon!